Introducing API-led connectivity into application networks. The biggest challenge with IT today is it just can't seem to go fast enough. We have to get everything in the cloud. We need big data and to provide analytics against that data. We need mobile applications that expose our information. And we need to keep up with all of the digital competition that's just growing and growing. Now the problem is, when we look at our IT delivery capacity, we're going to have this big gap in our need to support the change. And this gap is just going to grow larger and larger over time as the IT delivery capacity can't support the rapidness we need to adapt to. So how could we enable IT to support business transformation? Well, we could take that delivery capacity we have and we could instead focus on building reusable APIs and services, things that can be accessed and discovered. What this will provide is the business to self-serve and deliver more of their own projects the right way, rather than having to constantly go to IT to get information about data sets they need to access. They can reuse these APIs throughout their different applications. So let's bring this into a concrete example. What would a traditional project-based approach look like? Well, if we had a web app that provided real-time order data and status in history that needed to connect to the e-commerce system, an inventory data system like SAP, and maybe needed to access SAP in Salesforce. So what might this look like in a traditional approach? Well, we've got our SAP Salesforce e-commerce system. We've got the client we eventually need to get this data up to. Let's look at the integration project. Inside of the integration project we might build out, perhaps we combine the SAP, Salesforce, and customer data together. And then from that, we can derive order status by bringing in the e-commerce system and linking into that SAP and Salesforce data in our integration project. Also derive order history, similarly by bringing in the customer data and e-commerce orders themselves. Now we bring that all up into a web app and API, and we've achieved the project that we needed to bring data into. So what does this look like? What did we accomplish? Well, we could deliver this on time, and we could definitely deliver it within budget and meeting the requirements that are needed. But there's really no reuse in this integration project. It seems to be pretty tightly coupled to the applications we've linked into, and there's a lack of governance or an inability to manage access and gain visibility into what's happening in these various systems. Now, let's look into the future here a bit. We need a mobile API now, but the individuals who have worked on that old integration project, they're long gone or don't remember exactly what they had did to bring all these pieces together. So now, to support our mobile API, how are we going to bring this data together? Well, like many companies do, we may just reinvent the wheel again. We'll set up a second integration project that combines data together, derives order status and order history. We'll feed that up in a specific way to the mobile API, and that's how we'll support our mobile API. But there's a problem with this. How are we going to continue to adapt to the change we need to over time? Let's look at the same integration project and see how we could do this differently with an API-led connectivity approach. Well, if we look at our systems like SAP and Salesforce, we know that these are going to have customer data inside of them. What if we were to expose the SAP system with an API and expose our Salesforce customer data with an API as well? Then if desired, we could even bridge these two together with a single customer API that could be used. Similarly, with our e-commerce system, we could build an orders system API that sits underneath. The key thing here is that each piece has an API laid on top of it. These layers we often refer to as the system APIs. These can oftentimes just be internal APIs that don't get exposed publicly, but as you'll see, are going to be used in other APIs. Now on top of this, maybe we want to bring a process together like order status or order history. Bringing these processes that are focused on things like a specific use case of order status, they can then use the customer's system API in the orders API. Again, this layer we refer to as the process API focused around processes. Now that we have order status and order history, we can then bring together a higher up layer, a web app, or an API that's focused on delivering to that client. We often refer to this layer as the Experience API. Now, when that mobile application comes along 6 months later, what do we have to do this time around? Do we need to rebuild everything again, such as the old integration project? Well, we can build another experience API for the mobile application. And since we've already got these process APIs like order status and order history, we can link right into them again in our mobile API. Now, the flexibility this offers us is great because just like your organization, we could have new systems coming on board constantly. And maybe it would benefit the client, the mobile API specifically, to get data from these new systems. So we already know the approach we should take. We'd build a system API on top of toll shipments and UPS shipments. Maybe we'd bridge them together with another sys shipments API. On top of that, in the process layer, we could bring the shipment status together, focused on giving statuses around shipments. And then we could link that into the mobile API to add that extra experience into the mobile application. Again, promoting reuse throughout. Now that our old integration project has vanished away, let's take a look at the pros and the cons. Well, we can still deliver this approach on time, if not faster. It can be within budget since we're not re-delivering the same thing each project, and it will meet requirements. Now, what about some of these other pieces? Well, now we support reuse, as we're constantly reusing our process and system APIs throughout. We're no longer tightly coupled to each application. We're more composable and able to pull things out and put new pieces in. And our lack of governance we saw before is now built in to any of these layers we need it to be, since everything's exposed as an API. Now we've also brought on the benefit of our system being far more future-proof. So if down the road we bring on a more modern microservice, we can build a system API on top of that. We can bring these process APIs in place focused around the process at hand, and then eventually expose another experience API to say something like a partner portal. Another huge use case with future-proofing ourselves is we can build system APIs on top of our large legacy ERP system. We can build a few system APIs that hit on each area of that system, merge that together with some process APIs that are useful for our organization, and then bring out whatever experience APIs are relevant to us. Now, another great thing is we want to be very agile. We don't want to be locked into this single legacy ERP system. And this model allows us to be flexible like that. If we want to rip out just a single part of the ERP system, we can bring it out. Since our system API stays the same, we just need to change the implementation under the covers. And as time goes on, we can rip out more and more pieces of our legacy system and make that process transparent to the overall architecture. And what we end up with are effectively a bunch of building blocks. And the reason we call them building blocks is you can pull pieces out and reconstruct other areas if needed. You're not bound into this big monolithic architecture that is impossible to change. Now, what will happen over time is you're going to have this application network emerge. And the great thing is this isn't some huge project where you need to rip every piece out. As you take this API-led approach, you end up with more and more building blocks over time. So the application network emerges as you deliver projects. You don't need to build the full network out at once. And you might not get everything right at first. So as certain blocks get ripped out and other blocks get replaced, new systems come out and in, that's quite all right. Because you have this composable system, it allows you to be flexible in the way you need to adapt to change. And really the key thing here is this is your application network. It's not prescribed for all organizations. It's something that emerges as you solve your own use cases using an API-led approach. And we're now built for the change that we'll need to adapt to over time.